Gallery tells the story of some of the biggest characters to grace South African shores, showing that dodgy dealings have been a national pastime for as long as South African history has been written down. The book starts with the machinations of three colonial governors, Willem Adriaan van der Stel. Added to this is Cecil John Rhodes, Paul Kruger's corrupt activities, and the Broederbond. For more, I spoke to co-authors Nick Dall and Matthew Blackman.
For many years, we've been talking about corruption and specifically orientated, obviously, towards the ANC. But Nick and I had a discussion over many years about how this simply wasn't true, that it was only the ANC that was involved in corruption, and the fact that, you know, corruption in South Africa has a long history. And, you know, we then sat down to write that history.
Right. So the process of putting all of this history together, because I can imagine there were a lot of stories you could have picked from. What made these particular stories or individuals or characters stand out to you? I don't know who wants to take that one between Nick and Matthew.
Yeah, so we wanted the history to be a long one. So we started, we tried to find one as near to the beginning as possible. And the case of Willem Adriaan van der Stel, who created this massive farm at government expense and then sold the produce back to the company he controlled at prices he determined, was a classic one. And that goes all the way back to 1700. And as you say, we didn't have to look too hard, but some people did just stand out as even better at corruption than the rest. And we ended up with quite a nice mix. So we had Willem Adriaan van der Stel, we had two British colonial governors, we had Rhodes at Kruger, we had a bunch from the apartheid era, and we had two homeland leaders. And then, of course, we ended with some ANC stuff. So there was a very good mix of people, representative of all South Africans, although it must be added that they were all male. And I don't know what that means.
Okay, we'll interpret that one whichever way we can. Matthew, let's come to you. I mean, on the back of what Nick's just said about, Willem van der Stel, what were the similarities between Vergelegen at the time and Nkandla?
So actually, almost all of the people that we deal with have an Nkandla of their own. And it's quite fascinating in that the story of Nkandla is not unique to any age in South African history. Like every single, from Vergelegen onwards, every single corrupt person in South Africa, every kind of politician who was corrupt, seems to have had their own Nkandla or version of Nkandla. So, then again, this is what we tried to bring out in the book, was that all of these stories that we talk about the ANC, actually, so many of them occurred in other ages and at different times and through different politicians. So, we really are dealing with nothing particularly unique. And Nkandla is certainly one story that isn't unique in our history.
Right. Nick, let's talk about corruption in the homeland, because amongst the various chapters, probably that was the ones that I found very interesting. There is a lot that a lot of people didn't know about what was going on in the homelands at the time. Perhaps you can just briefly let us in on what was going on.
Yeah, so the homelands were this kind of perfect storm for corruption. It's just the perfect conditions are absolutely ideal, because you've got this country which is basically a fake country. And these people who are, everyone accepts that they're puppets. But at the same time, the apartheid state had to make them work. So they just threw money at these things. So like most corrupt governments, at some point, you have to balance your books. But in the homelands, this wasn't even necessary. So, we deal with the Matanzima brothers in the Transkei. And they, no sooner had they taken power than they started just giving themselves government farms, hotels. They'd buy a hotel for that was valued at 30,000 rand for 2,000 rand, and then sell it the next week for 60,000 rand, that kind of thing. And they just went on, and then they got embroiled in some fairly dodgy stuff with Saul Kerzner. And Bantu Holomisa eventually kicked them out. But I think even more flagrant was the corruption in Bophuthatswana, which once again featured Sol Kerzner, who just saw these homeland as an opportunity to have casinos and kind of showgirls and that kind of stuff in South Africa, which was a pretty puritanical country at the time. And Kerzner and Mangope struck up this friendship, and they actually somehow managed to get the apartheid government funded part of Sun City, directly paid for the roads and some of the hotel, which then it was an immensely corrupt thing. It wasn't just, the sordid front of the thing. It was all like there were just kickbacks left, right, and center. And I think what's interesting with both these homelands leaders is that when democracy came in 94, they instantly became pariahs. But Sol Kerzner then just sort of got into bed with Mandela and carried it all on. So yeah, that's also quite an interesting lesson, I think.
Right. Matthew, before I let you go, what do you want readers to get from this book?
Well, I think there are two things, really. One is that, we're not looking at something entirely unique when we look at the ANC. This is not in any way to excuse the ANC's behavior. In fact, the whole book is really about, what a tragic history our history is because of the amount of corruption that's taken place in our country. The other thing to take away is enjoyment. Some of these stories are actually quite funny, and we have tried our best to bring out the humor of these stories, and some of them are quite intriguing. So, the book was written as much as a kind of warning to those who seem to think that the ANC is the only corrupt organization in our country, as much as about, just it being an enjoyable read.
That's it from me. More news with my colleague Nompumelelo Siziba at the top of the hour. Your weather details are coming up next with Mpho Rasimpi. Goodbye.